So, I do believe we are live. Welcome to another photography locked down challenge. I'm just running some tests, make sure everything's working. Yes, it is. Fantastic. Good evening, everybody. Good morning, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. If you don't know what on earth is going on, Photography Lockdown Challenges are creative challenges to help photographers grow their creative skills and thinking. We do challenges most months, and we do live feedback sessions, of which this is one. This one's slightly different because we've got an extremely inspiring and very interesting guest who's come to talk to us. We can always learn more by listening to people who have been to places we haven't, and our guest tonight certainly has done that. Before we just get going, I want to give a quick shout out to say hello and thank you to our donators this month: Alan Hedge, Yvonne Williams, Kim Skirton and Gillian Field. Photography Lockdown Challenges are just supported by donations. There's no fee. If people find value, then thank you for making these little donations, because it does cost a bit to try and keep this going. That said, there is a little dollar symbol in the chat, and if anybody wants to post a sponsored question or buy everybody in the group a sticker or something like that, then that goes to keep the PLD group going. I just need to say that PLD is going on holiday for July. As many of you know, I broadcast to you from New Milton Photographic because where I live out in the countryside, I just do not have the internet connection to be able to maintain this sort of a broadcast. So I will be moving. Unfortunately, I've got to build part of my house first, so I am going to be taking most of July off. However, I have got a great challenge for you and a request. So you may have seen in the group I did a post asking about a paid photo competition. So I'm in partnership with clickersnap.com, as I'm sure many of you know. We have set up something called the PosiPix Photo Competition. It is a pay-to-enter competition with very similar challenges and feedback. Now, there are also cash prizes involved in this one, and 25% of your entry fee goes directly to a charity or something that does a bit of good in the world, hence PosiPix, Positive Pictures. I will be telling you more about that later on. But what I want you guys to do, or what I'm asking you to do, is to leak test it for us, please, because ultimately it's going to be rolled out across the whole of Clickersnap's audience, which is approaching towards 2 million now. Now, there's nowhere near that number of people. We are inviting a small group such as yourselves, people who've done my online courses, people in my little community, and Tom is bringing in just the Clickersnap discussion group. These are people who look for bugs and just help, find things that work. So it's just you guys that are invited this time, so your chances of winning the first prize of £700 or one of the 100 pound runners-up prizes are considerably higher. What we want you to do is to test it for us, please. We'll be doing a live feedback session just like this for that challenge, and it is a really, really good theme. I'm proud of this one, but I'm premature in announcing it because we'd hope to have the system, the site, the PosiPix site up and running by now. However, as with all new things, best laid plans of mice and men. We're hoping it will be live on Tuesday. Keep an eye on our website, in the group, on Facebook, and of course on my email list. My emails, we'll ping you an email as soon as it's live. But please come and join in, because you will be supporting a very, very good cause. You'll be supporting the Legacy of War Foundation, and you're going to be hearing from its CEO and founder in a very short while. If you don't particularly want to join in the paid-for competition, you are of course more than welcome to enter the challenge. Shoot some pictures for it. It's a great challenge, and post them within our group. Now, this time there is only one of me, so I won't be able to do a feedback session within the group. I'm going to have to do it in the PosiPix one next time. But you are more than welcome to post some pictures in there. I'll leave some comments if I can. Share your pictures with everyone else, but I would really appreciate it if you can come and join in the PosiPix competition. Keep your eyes peeled. We will be letting you know. As I say, it will be a £5 entry fee. 25% of that goes directly to Giles Duley's Legacy of War Foundation. There is a link in the description area below if you want to find out more about that. I'm going to be announcing our Shadow winners and runners-up in about an hour and a half after we've had an informal chat with Giles about his career as a photographer, changes of direction, and some life-changing events that would probably have stopped others dead in their tracks. Now, if you have a question, by all means, please put it in the chat along the way. We'll do our best to answer as we go. If you've prepared a specific question, then we will do a 10-minute Q&A at the end in about an hour, and then I'll go through our winners. So first of all, please, everybody, I'd like you to welcome someone I was delighted to have made the acquaintance of back in February, Mr. Giles Duley. Thank you so much for joining us, Giles.
Hi.
Hello, Giles. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Cool. Thank you for joining us. It was such good fun meeting you and hanging out with you back in February, even though it was quite brief.
Wow, February. That seems like a long time ago now.
Yes, it does. So, yeah, I thought maybe we'd kick off. I might ask you a couple of questions. Of course, I've gone and put the wrong piece of paper somewhere else because I'm good at doing things like that. But first off, kind of, by all means, feel free to ad lib and just join in and do things. But, like, what was it that got you into photography in the first place? Let's just touch on that one. I'm going to grab my notes while you...
You grab your notes. I'm just going to ramble away.
You ramble for a minute.
My introduction to photography actually came about when I was 18 years old. I was in America on a sports scholarship. I was the world's worst boxer. I remember I thought I was great. I remember my coach saying, "You take a punch really well, Giles." But at 18, you take everything as a compliment. And I was going to the University of Southern Mississippi, and unfortunately, I had a car accident. And the car accident resulted in me being flown back to the UK and told I would never do any sport again. So suddenly, kind of everything changed in my life. I was a very angry young man. As an 18-year-old, I had no place at university. I'm not very academic. I'm dyslexic. I'd struggled at school. Sport had been my way out. And suddenly, having that taken away from me, I had no idea what was coming next. And then, as I'm lying in a hospital bed, two small gifts changed my life forever. One was an Olympus OM10 camera, and another book by the war photographer Don McCullen. My godfather, actually, he passed away, and he left me these two things that he bought the week before, and his widow brought them to me, gave them to me in the hospital bed. And, I will say to people, we never know the impact we'll have on others, but there's an example of just these two small little gifts changing the whole direction of my life. I had never seen photographs like Don McCullen's. I grew up in a house, my parents weren't that interested in the arts or the media or the news, and I had never kind of confronted that kind of imagery. And seeing these black and white images of his work in Biafra, particularly Bangladesh, Vietnam, Northern Ireland, completely blew my mind. To this day, if I shut my eyes, I can still see those first images. There's probably 5 photographs that were in his biography that stuck in my mind. And I just knew there and then that's what I was going to do with my life, that I wanted to make photographs like Don's that had this power. And the Olympus OM10 camera, I always say that was like being given my voice for the first time. As I said, I'm dyslexic. I'd struggled at school. I was held back a year. I was always told I was stupid. And I had always felt like I had a lot to say, but had no means of expressing myself. And suddenly I had this camera and I started making photographs, and it was like being given my voice. So it was a pretty sort of sudden, dramatic end. I mean, it's beginning to my photography, literally getting that camera, the book, and I just knew that's it. So in the space of 5 minutes, probably from having that camera in my hand, I knew that I would never put it down.
You pretty much haven't, have you?
No. No. Absolutely. I've thrown them out of windows. I've smashed them in streets. I've hit somebody with one once. Yeah.
You hit someone. You hit someone with one. You've got to tell us about that.
It was a no. I mean, I didn't hit him full on. I had a little fight with Liam Gallagher once, a very drunk fight in Glasgow with Liam Gallagher. But my camera came between us. Let's put it that way.
Sorry, say that bit again.
My camera came between us. Let's put it that way. But, he was pissed off with me because I wouldn't take his photograph. It's a long story, but I was on the road with Oasis quite a long time, so we had a volatile thing, yeah.
Which of course segues us beautifully into, like, where, if you like, I mean, because that's quite a jump, from being a kid thinking, I really want to do pictures like Don McCullen. I totally get that. To Liam Gallagher and others in your, portfolio, that's quite a jump. That's not something you do like that overnight.
Well, no, it kind of was. I
All
was
right.
18. I'm 18 years old. I got this camera. I wanted to be Don McCullen. I leave hospital. I taught myself basics of photography lying in a hospital bed. I got a place in Bristol. There's a place called Filton Foundation College, which is amazing. It's a 1-year foundation in art. I went there, and I had friends that were musicians, that were people living in Bristol, and they said, "Come and photograph our gigs," which I did. And I kind of think I always wanted to be a rock musician. I think I wanted to be in a band, and I was shit at playing instruments. So suddenly I found actually a camera was just as good, because the bands, every decent rock band has a massive ego, and they want to be photographed. They want people to be documenting them. And so having a photographer with them was gold dust to them. So they wanted me around all the time. So I found like I was almost a member of the band. I'd go on the road with musicians, do all this stuff. And very quickly that just took off. And yeah, the ideas of heading off to some war zone kind of disappeared out the window, because I was having the best life you could imagine for an 18, 19-year-old.
Absolutely. But I mean, okay, so you're down in Bristol, you got the Filton Centre. So forgive me, I'm a bit ignorant of this sort of thing. So I'm guessing there were some fairly large names were playing there, and that's kind of how you.
Oh, no, it was small bands. And then I went up to. I got a place actually at Bournemouth Art College, which at the time was a particularly good art college. I actually got a place there by using somebody else's portfolio, because I just started photography, so I didn't have enough pictures yet. So I borrowed somebody else's portfolio, went there, and the guy Mike, who was the head of the course, is a bit of a character himself, an old-fashioned photographer. And we went through the whole interview. At the end of it, he closed the portfolio, and he looked at me and he said, "You didn't take any of these photographs, did you?" I went, "No." And he said, "Yeah, but you've got all the bullshit you're going to need to be a photographer." He goes, "That's half the battle." He said, "I believe you can be a photographer." So I got a place just through bullshit. Started at Bournemouth Art College, but then decided I wanted to work for magazines in London. So I went up to London, showed my portfolio to some magazines. and that's quite a funny story, because I was a real country lad. So I had like dungarees, I had long hair. I don't even know if I had shoes. I was a bit of a hippie. And I got up to London, and I go to Select Music magazine, which was a particularly kind of cool magazine at the time. Walked in there, couldn't get an appointment. So I just kept staying in the lift until the picture editor was in the lift, Simon Vinyl, and just accosted him. He invited me and we had a coffee. He looked at my portfolio. He said, "It's great. I'll give you work, but can you work under pressure?" And I said, "Well, I'm sure I can. I'll come back. Give me a couple of months." So I left. And I was 19, I think, then. And what I didn't realize, he meant like, could you work with somebody really famous under that pressure? I thought he meant something a bit more. So I managed to get myself to Cuba, which was still under an embargo, and went there to take photographs. I managed to sneak myself. I got arrested by the Cuban equivalent of the KGB. I had a big adventure in Cuba and came back and sort of said to him this. And he went, "No, I just meant, could you photograph someone famous? I didn't expect you to get arrested by the KGB." I was like, "Well, I showed I can work under pressure." And so he gave me a job. And I remember my first big shoot was to go to Detroit to photograph a band called the Black Crowes, which is this kind of major rock and roll band. And I was a bit nervous about it. I was like, maybe I'm a bit out of my depth. I didn't know anything. I mean, I didn't know how to use studio lighting. I had a basic camera kit. I just upgraded for the Olympus, but it was still very basic. And I got there and I took photographs of the band. And then we were supposed to fly back that night, but I ended up going on the tour bus with the band, because I thought surely if they asked me to come on, I should just stick with it. So I missed my flight. When I can't remember, I think we went from Detroit to Chicago on the back of this bus. And I remember the bass player of the band, he was sipping from a bottle of Jack Daniels. And I thought this was very cool. And he said, "Do you want a whiskey, Giles?" And I said, "Yes." And he reached down, picked up a whole other bottle of whiskey and just passed that to me. And I was like, wow, this is my job now. And that was it, really. And I don't think I ever stopped kind of, I never got off a tour bus for the next 10 years. It was crazy. It was fun. I learned photography by then. So every shoot I would do at the beginning, I would go out and buy equipment to learn. And I used to watch documentaries. So I remember watching a documentary on Annie Leibovitz. And I remember she had, I didn't know what it was, but it was a big softbox. And I'd watch all the background and I'd try and understand. And I remember going to the shop the next day, going to Calumet in London and going, okay, it was a big white glowy thing. That's what I want. And they were like looking at me going, "Do you know what you're talking about?" I said, "No, it's a big white glowy thing." And they said, "Do you mean a softbox?" I said, "I don't know." And they got it out. I said, "Yeah, that's it. I'll take it home. Me and my friends would get drunk probably and try and fix it. And then I'll take photographs of my dog." And that's how I learned photography. But each shoot I did, my rule was every bit of that money would go and buy equipment so I could learn how to use it. And that's how I did it. I never assisted. I never did any of the things you're supposed to do. So I kind of went in a bit of an angle. It worked out.
It's probably a good way of going about it. Giles, just before we continue, there's a lot of people saying that for some reason our audio levels are different and that you're very loud and I'm very quiet. I've just checked mine. My input is on full blast. Are you able to take your input down a bit, please? Because I can't. I don't know if
I might be able to, but I'm going to have to go into system preferences. So give me a minute, everyone.
Yeah, of course. No, while you were speaking, I had a fiddle with mine. I don't know if it's sounding any better. Am I any louder, people? Just give us a yes or something. Everyone's saying that they have to toggle between us. Maybe I can move the mic a bit closer. Okay. Usually I'm drowning everyone out.
I have turned down my input. I don't know how that is better for everyone.
It's a bit better for me. Let me just put that through. That should. Okay, so everyone is saying... Everyone's saying it hasn't made any difference. I've got the mic right in front of my mouth. I will try speaking louder, and I hope I don't deafen you, Giles.
No, it's fine. Sorry, I can't adjust it any more than that. I think it's, down your end.
I'm really sorry, people. I don't know what we can do to change this. Oh, Crystal says it's better. Everyone's saying it's a bit better. Okay, I'm just going to shout because my input is on absolute full blast and yours is turned down. I don't know what's going on. Okay, so where had we got to? So you're living this rock and roll lifestyle with bottles of Jack Daniels and shooting pictures. You've broken all the rules. You're a self-taught photographer who's been inspired by things and people you've seen along the way. Now, I mean, yes, you have picked up this kind of label as someone who became a war photographer, and I also have heard you say that you're not a war photographer, that you photograph love stories in unlikely places, and that really touched me. But before we kind of maybe go to that place, I think it'd be, because I do, would you mind telling us that story about what your grandmother said to you? Yeah,
well, I mean, you've got quite a long... I mean, so, okay, if we do it briefly, because it's quite a big transition.
Exactly, it's a big one. So, yeah, because I really want to talk to you about some of your personal stuff, some of the things that you just like doing, away from the media, away from the spotlight.
So the change came, I guess, when I was about 28. I had got kind of very cynical about the industry I worked in. I'm a portrait photographer. Although I was photographing bands, I loved people. I was fascinated by people. And increasingly, it was about celebrity culture, which I didn't like. And also, I didn't like the way that women were portrayed in the magazines I worked for. There'd been this massive success of FHM magazine, which was all about sort of semi-naked women on the front of their magazine. And so every other magazine felt they had to copy that to make sales. And so suddenly I was being asked if I was photographing an actress, she was supposed to be in her underwear. And, I was working for magazines like GQ and Esquire, Sunday Times, and magazines that I respected, and suddenly the way they worked was changing, and I felt very uncomfortable about that. And so it came to a climax when I was 28, doing a shoot in the Charlotte Street Hotel in London. And basically, there was a young actress, and there was an argument going on between the editor of the magazine and her agent about her state of undress. And I remember the editor of the magazine saying basically she could F off if she didn't do it semi-naked, and she was crying, and I just was like, this is not why I became a photographer. So the rock and roll stories, I took all my cameras, and I had a big Mamiya RZ, so we're talking like massive cameras and tripods, and I threw them all out the window of the Charlotte Street Hotel and said, that's it, I'm done, and walked out. The story wasn't quite that rock and roll. I kind of threw them on the bed of the Charlotte Street Hotel, and it's just unfortunately big heavy cameras hit the sort of bed springs and bounced out the window, and then did the street below. And I remember then saying to this young actress as well, I said, like, you're coming as well, and we just left. And that was it. I walked away from it. I kind of got sick of the way that the industry was working at that point. I think it's got a little bit better, but it's still a mess. I don't understand why in a nice glossy magazine, if you've got David Beckham, he'd be wearing a suit. If you've got Kate Winslet, she has to be in her underwear. It makes no sense to me. And as a portrait photographer, I was losing the passion because I wanted to connect with people, and it all become about this sort of stylized and very sexist industry. But that was it. I walked away. I literally didn't have a camera. It was smashed on the Charlotte Street Hotel. I moved down to Hastings, where I live right now, sat by the sea, and kind of, you said I've taken photographs since that moment, and actually that was the first time I didn't take photographs. I became a bar mouse. My friends that knew me didn't really understand why I'd given up this kind of lifestyle of hanging out with, Mariah Carey, Marilyn Manson, Lenny Kravitz, people that had become my friends. I'd walked away from all that to work in a bar, but I was just very depressed and really in a dark place. Photography, as I said, has never been about making money or just making photographs. It's my voice, and I felt I had corrupted it. I felt I had destroyed what it is that I loved, and so I hated myself because of that. I was in a really, really dark place. And then I don't think I told you this before, but then at the really lowest point, when I wasn't even sure if I wanted to carry on with my own life or anything, I really was about 30 years old and I was done. I was drinking all day long and just lost. And I got a job. It's kind of a weird story how it happened, but I got a job as a care worker, as a support worker for a young man with autism.
I was going to ask you about that because I did know a bit about that, because that was quite an interesting link between you being down and then your desire to do what you did.
Well, what it was, as I say, when you're very depressed, you don't see much purpose in your own life, but I saw a purpose in helping somebody else. And so Nick, who is a dear friend now, his autism means he sort of struggles to function on daily things. So, crossing the road, making tea, he needs 24-hour support to get dressed in the mornings when he eats. And, I became, let's say, his live-in carer for 1 day a week. And then it became, by the end, 7 days a week. And so for 2 years, that's what I did every day of my life, was looking after Nick. And I say looking after Nick, by the end, we were looking after each other. I got as much from it as he got. And at the end of about 2 years, I remember talking to his parents, and Nick used to self-harm very badly. So he hit his head until it'd be pouring with blood. And you try and stop him, but that would actually make more violence, the sort of systems that we had to try and do to get him through it. But when we talked to the psychologists and the healthcare professionals about his condition, actually it was very hard for him to get the support that he needed. So in the end, what happened is we thought, well, why don't I photograph his life? Why don't I document whatever goes on in his life? And then Nick himself would go through those photographs with me and help the edit, because it's very difficult for him verbally to express himself. So that's what I did, and I photographed every day. And then one day he'd been self-harming and he had blood pouring down his face, and I'd asked him if he minded me photographing it, and he'd asked me to photograph it. So I photographed these images of him.
Do you happen to have those pictures on your desktop?
I won't show them. It's something personal.
It's now something private and personal.
Exactly, and this was for Nick, and so I had these pictures, and we then, the next time we saw the psychologists and the healthcare professionals, we laid out photographs in front of them. And you could see the reaction, because these people that were telling his mother, look, you over-exaggerate, we don't believe it. Suddenly when you're confronted with this picture, and he had literally it's a hole in his head where he'd beaten himself for so long, for so many years, and it's pouring blood across his face. And faced with that, these people responded, and people backtracked and were like, well, we've got to do more, we've got to change things. And that's the eureka moment. That's the moment that this guy, me, who had given up photography, lost his voice, lost his purpose in life, but knew he had one gift, and that is to tell stories. Suddenly, that was the moment I go, that's what I need to be doing, is telling other people's stories, not photographing bands, not photographing fashion models. No, I need to be using this little skill that I have to have a slightly positive impact on other people's lives by helping them to tell their stories. And so that was it. That was the moment. I sold my flat. I moved to Angola, based myself there, spent the next 6 months, 8 months living there, volunteering my services for small NGOs. I decided as well that if I was going to do this, I was going to do it my way, that I was not going to work for any magazines. Nobody was going to commission me. I had a kind of completely back to front way of doing it, because I thought if anybody commissions me, they're going to tell me how I should be photographing these stories, and I wanted to do it the way I wanted to do it. So I went there, based myself, and started telling stories through photography that way. And in answer to your question about the war photographer thing, it's more that I would say that I set out. I'm not a photojournalist. I'm an angry man with a camera. I thought there was injustice in the world. I had a tool that could maybe fight that injustice in whatever small way. And I was not going out there thinking I'm going to sell these photographs. I would say 60-70% of my photographs never get seen in public. They get used in Houses of Parliament, they get used in advocacy, they get used in court cases. That was always the initial thing for my photography. And I'm also not a war photographer, I'm an anti-war photographer. I was there because I hate war. And that's why you won't see pictures of guns and tanks and planes. My photographs are always about the people caught up in those conflicts.
You, when I heard you speak at Exposure and you told the story of Khulud, would you be up for sharing a little bit about that story?
Sure. I mean, we can attempt. I know we had some challenges. I mean,
there's so much to talk to you about, Giles. You have done so much. And you make such an incredible difference in this world. You do. You're a very humble man, but you do, I watched that auditorium doing what I'm doing now with a bunch of, sitting around with tears in their eyes, listening to the things you get up to. And I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. It's like, you do. And there are so many stories I want to bring in, and there's other things I want to talk to you about as well, because you're a man of many things. Go on, I'll shut up and let you speak.
No, all I was going to say is it's like we're all cogs in a wheel, and photography, being a photographer is a particularly one that gets a lot of attention. But I work with NGOs, I work with charities where you've got medical staff who spend 2-3 years working in Afghanistan at minimal wage. You've got people working in offices in Geneva doing huge amounts of incredibly important work. As a photographer, I'm a cog between a lot of people, so that maybe I can go and visit a project in Afghanistan or whatever, spend a week there, take some photographs, come back, and I get the attention, not the staff that's been working there for 1 year. Mm-hmm. So in terms of how I see it myself, I'm just that little part. It's frustrating that as photographers, we often get more attention. I don't think that's right. So what I would say is that I'm just part of a system that creates change. I'm part of a much bigger thing. It's just that the photography part maybe gets a bit more attention about it. But I play a small part in a much bigger wheel. But
do you mind me asking? Because many people have the preconception that documentary photographers, let's just say the word photographers, they swan off around the world with lots of expensive kit and earn tons of money. And do you mind me asking, how do you make a living?
You know what? I mean, I am able to make a living from a lot of different reasons. So, as I said, when I set out to do this, I decided the format was not going to be to get magazines and newspapers to pay for my living, because that was never going to be a good enough income. It was not going to enable me to do what I wanted to do. So right from the beginning, I said, I need to do this in a completely different way. For me, magazines, newspapers, TV was going to be my outlet, but the funding was going to have to come from somewhere else. So I partnered with NGOs and charities right at the beginning. I got, private beneficiaries and people to support my work, donors, all sorts of things, and just try and explain to people. And it's taken years, but now I have some businesses and companies and individuals that see the value in my work and support it in its own way. So, I've managed to find a path. I think I was lucky in that 15, 16 years ago, I'd already made that decision that newspapers and magazines were never going to be a source of income, that social media, the internet and magazines, etc., were going to be my outlet, but income would have to come from somewhere else. And I kind of created that model right from the beginning. So people now look at it and go, how do you afford to do it? How do you do it? Well, it's taken years and years of building it up. But, I have things like there's an amazing company called Travel Edge in the States, which is a high-end travel company. But the CEO of that is an amazing man that grew up in Congo, is fascinated by work, and I'm one of their, they call me an explorer in residence. But, they help support my work purely because they believe in it and believe it has an importance. So that's kind of how I've managed to fund it. And that's given me the freedom, which means I don't have editorial constraints. I don't have an editor saying to me, this is the story. I remember going to Angola when I was in Angola and doing a story on landmines. And it was one of the first times I confronted, injured children from landmines, the horrors of that. And I remember coming back and sitting with the editor of the Sunday Times, who I knew, the picture editors, from the celebrity stuff, and then looking at the pictures, and then one of the editors coming in and looking at it and going, do you have any pictures of rats? And they basically read a story about how rats are sniffing out mines, which actually is a completely different country that happens in Mozambique. And I remember just physically sick that he wasn't even interested in these pictures of these children, the story that was there, because he had read somewhere about rats and he thought, people, and he goes, pigs, I've heard pigs as well. People would love that in the Sunday paper. And I remember thinking, excuse my language, fuck you, I'm never going to do this. And that was the moment I said, I'll never work for a magazine or edit. They can use my pictures, but I have to control it. And I also never use picture library. So you can't buy my photographs. You cannot go online and buy a Giles Duley photograph to use in your magazine. It has to be the story, because I have to believe it's done in the right way. So to do that, I had to fund it in a completely different model. Sorry, I'm rambling, but
yeah, but I mean that that is just an amazing thing, because it is about having personal integrity with the things that you believe in, the thing that one believes in. But also that explains another question, which I sort of didn't really realise I had till you said that, and that is, you don't see Giles Duley photos all over the place. There's a handful sort of kicking around on the internet. But yes,
yeah, I mean, why
that explains why.
Yeah, why do you take a photograph? For me, it's because I wanted to create some kind of change, and I've constantly, from the moment I started doing the photography I'm doing now, this kind of conflict photography, this anti-war photography, I've constantly been told I can't do it that way. I was told I can't shoot on film. I shouldn't shoot black and white. That my pictures need to be sharp. I was told that I would have to work for magazines, that if I wanted to be well known, it would have to be in people like New York Times, would have to publish it, or National Geographic. I was told, you shouldn't spend months doing a story because there isn't the budget to do it. I was told, don't go back and do the same story again because it's already been done. Something I do. I go back year after year after year seeing families. Everything told me not to do, rather than say, oh, I can't do it that way. I was like, well, how can I make it happen that way? And the reward for me now is the freedom I have. And so I get amazing opportunities like the UNHCR, for example, the big refugee agency. I did a project for them in 2016. And they came to me, but this is because of years of what I've been doing and them seeing it. And imagine this, that they came and they commissioned me for a year. So they said they'd pay me a salary, travel. I could go wherever I wanted, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, throughout the Middle East, and across Europe. And the commission was one sentence. And it just said, Giles, follow your heart. Now, that to me is the most amazing thing. And everybody else goes, oh my God, how do you get that? But it was 8-9 years of working my ass off. I used to do care work. I used to look after somebody with multiple sclerosis, and I would wipe his ass and help him to the toilet. He was a very difficult man, to fund my work, because I would rather do that than the Sunday Times paying me to do it the way they wanted to do it. So, I always say to a young photographer, when they're starting out and they're passionate about something, if they come to me and they've got a project, they want my advice, and I was like, what are you going to sacrifice for it? Because there's always a sacrifice.
There is always a cost involved in everything that we do. I think it's well worth choosing our problems wisely. I have to ask you, because do you want to tell us a little bit about when you became the news yourself, and a little bit about what happened to you and that journey? Because, many people are confronted by, the thought of photography, and you've been places few have.
Yeah, I mean, for me, obviously, it's something that always crops up. It's kind of, it's a boring tale for me now.
It's a boring story. You've sold it so many times, but I have to ask.
No, it's not. It's not that it's that I've sold it so many times. It's like anybody, we've all had our worst experiences, and we don't necessarily always want to be. That's what we focus on, and it was
exactly.
10 years ago.
I would like people to just have an insight, because it does give people an insight into who you are.
Sure.
And I don't want to necessarily linger on all the details, etc. But there are some key points, and you know what they are, because you have to tell this story so often. And I would like to talk other things, but I think there are many people here who probably don't know about this. So.
Yeah, well, I would say that's a really good thing for me, because I've always said I want to be forgotten and my photographs are remembered. So, it's actually something I do a lot, is to make sure that my story is not associated around with my work, because otherwise it overshadows it. People, for example, will always take away one thing. Like, so if I go on the BBC to be interviewed about a project in Syria, and then the first question is, oh, I hear you got blown up in Afghanistan, I will walk out, because, and I have walked out of an interview, BBC World Service, because of that question. And I asked them not to ask it, because anybody listening to the interview will remember, oh, that guy that got his legs blown off in Afghanistan, not the story about the civilians in Syria that are getting injured. So that's why I'm sort of funny about it. But yeah, I mean,
Giles, it doesn't really matter. I mean, anybody can Google this and go and find out precisely what happened to you, and find that amazing self-portrait you took of yourself. But what I think, go on.
It's fine. I mean, I say it, but I think it's also important to explain why it's not important, because
exactly.
otherwise, yeah, we all focus on those things. But yeah, in 2011, working in Afghanistan, doing the work that I've been talking about, I stepped on an IED after an ambush. Got my legs blown off, my left arm blown, had shrapnel through my tummy, through my belly, through every part of my body. Spent 46 days in intensive care, a year in hospital, 37 operations just to keep me alive, lungs stopped working, heart attacks, strokes. I mean, you name it, it pretty much happened. I did the talk in the big NHS trust, and I remember saying there the only department that didn't know me well was the gynecological department, because literally every other department had dealt with me and saved my life at some point. So it was a miracle I survived, and yeah, but I did survive. It's funny because people talk about it. Was it a big change in your work? And again, sometimes in the media it comes across as Giles Duley is now anti-war. He does this. I got injured because of what I was doing, and those beliefs never changed before or after. What it did do is, I spent, as I said, a year in hospital, another 6 months learning to walk again, and then the first place I went back to work was Afghanistan, to go and document civilians injured in the same way. And I guess the thing that it gave me was an understanding of the people that I was working with, a greater empathy, but also I was a better man by then. I was more focused and stronger and more able to work longer and be really more dedicated to it in a strange way. Obviously, when I went back to Afghanistan, I remember having a big discussion in my own mind, because as any photographer here will say, you watch any photographer in a room, they'll be down on the floor, they'll be standing on the step, they'll be finding angles, they'll be doing everything. Photographers suddenly jump around rooms. Photographers are very agile people. They're always moving and doing stuff. Now imagine losing all of that. You've got one angle. I have one angle of shot. The whole palette that I had to paint with was taken away from me. All the things, all the skills that I'd spent over 20 years developing had gone. Try and use a camera, one-handed, focusing. Everything was a challenge. So, it's like being, a sports star and suddenly you've got one arm and you play tennis, or it was huge. And any photographer will understand that. Next time you're out taking photographs, maybe this will be one of your challenges. Do it where you can't kneel, you can't bend, you can't use your legs. You have to stand in that same position. You've got one hand. That's it. So at first I was like, I shouldn't carry on, because I thought if I go back to Afghanistan and I'm photographing an injured child, if I can't be the best photographer doing it, I shouldn't be doing it, because this is not about me trying to prove I can take photographs again. So I was very torn. I went through a big decision about whether I should be working again. And in the end, I decided I could, because for all the lack of mobility and the lack of technical stuff now, I was going to have something else that most photographers don't have, which is literally the same experience as somebody injured in conflict. To understand what it's like for a child having his prosthetic leg fitted for the first time, what it's like for a woman who's been paralyzed and told she can't live the life she lived before. I would have that same sense of suffering, of experience that most of the people that I document have. And I decided that the two were going to balance each other out. And I decided that I was going to see my limitations as a strength. I think that the most creativity comes from limitations. When we have the palette, we're able to do anything. Sometimes we're so overwhelmed by that, we struggle. A good example is cinema. You look at like 1930s, 1940s horror films. They couldn't create the monsters, so they had to create shadows, noise, sound effects, music. Everything was built to build tension. Now with CGI, you can do anything, you can create anything. And so those films don't have the same scary factor to me. And so for me as a photographer, I was like, okay, you know what? I can't get all those cool angles. I'm never going to win awards for my photography anymore, because I can't do what every other photographer is able to do. But what I can do is say, okay, my camera's on a tripod. I'm going to do a portrait of you straight at your eyes. That's it. And now all I'm going to think about, because I can't think about an angle, I can't think about anything clever. All I can think about is my relationship of photographing you and how we relate. So all my focus is on that. And because of that, I say I'm a better photographer now.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, portrait photography is, of course, one of your great loves. And you have been to you've been to many refugee environments, etc., and you've shot some incredibly powerful portraits. But you're also a total foodie. Now, I read or heard something, or heard you once say that you will shoot a far better portrait if you sit down and eat with the people you're about to photograph. And I don't know if you have any photos you'd like, because I mean, I can talk to you all blooming night, but you know, I don't know if there's anything you want to share around that. But I know you've got some, and there is a story I'd love you to speak about when you were very challenged in an environment where you were shooting some portraits. It's a story I've heard you tell, and you were kind of having a bit of a grump and a grizzle, and an old lady, one of these refugees, came and said something to you.
I mean, well, yeah, I wasn't taking photographs. If you're thinking about the story of Shamar, I mean, Shamar was a woman in Jordan, and she's a Syrian refugee. And actually, I wasn't taking photographs. I turned up at a camp. If this is the story you're talking about, and basically she came out and she saw me arrive, and she waved her finger at me, and she said, "We don't want a photographer here."
Yeah, that's the one.
And she said, "You know, go away. We don't want to be photographed." And you know, I just looked at her and I said, "I totally understand, you know, grandmother. I totally understand what you're saying, but please just let me come here, show my respects, and talk to people." And so she said, "Fine." And you know, she was a very matriarchal society. It was a relatively small, unofficial camp with maybe a dozen families, a couple hundred people. And I just spent the next week just coming and talking and listening. You know, that's always, I say, the most important thing is listening. And as a photographer, I've learned as well, the less photographs I take, the better I am as well. So my camera's in, you know, the bag most of the time. I never turn up with a camera in my hand. It's always in my bag. And I spent the whole week, my camera never came out. And after the week, I do portraits a lot against a white background, a white bed sheet that I travel with. And I always try and get the community to help me set up the studio, because again, it makes everyone feel like they're participants. And so everyone's kind of setting up this white sheet. And as we're getting ready and I'm loading up my camera, I was thinking, who should I ask first to do a portrait of? There's a few people I'd got on with. And Shamar, this woman in her 80s, she'd never spoken to me since that first day, but I'd always seen her in the corner of my eyes. And as I turned around, she was stood in front of the sheet. And I looked at her and she just looked at me. She didn't say a word. And she was basically saying, you know, you can now make my portrait. And that's why I use the word make a portrait. You know, I try not to use the word take a photograph or shoot an image. They seem like hostile acts to me. I will say you make a photograph, because the best photographs are not taken, they're given. And Shamar had watched me over that week. She had respected what I was doing, and in return for that allowed me to make her portrait. And that for me was a very beautiful moment, but a moment also that reinforces the belief that I have that, you know, people sometimes say to me, "Oh, I went to this place, nobody will let me photograph them, blah, blah, blah." I said, "How long did you spend there?" They're like, "I was there for like 2 hours, 3 hours." Okay, speak to me after you've been there for 3 weeks and tell me that. You know, sometimes it takes time, and a story is the most important thing we have. It's our most precious commodity, our thing. And when, you know, they've lost everything at home. You know, they're proud family, and they're in a tent where they've got nothing. And then the photographer turns up and expects that person just to pose for a photograph. You know, use your brain, sit back and respect that person. And that's where food comes in for me. You know, because I don't think of the people I photograph as subjects. I think of them as friends. And most of the people I have photographed for years, and I've got to know them. And how do you make friends? Exactly. You know, for me, it's food. You know, the difference between an acquaintance and a friend is food. And when I sit and I eat with someone, it's me saying that you know, I respect you. You're an equal to me. I want to know your story. I want to be friends. And that's how a relationship starts. So, yeah, my basic rule is, you know, wherever possible. Obviously, sometimes, you know, you might be working in a hospital. It's too chaotic. You can't do that. But in terms of the longer relationships I have with people, it always starts with food.
Do you know, it's a strange thing. Some years ago, many years ago, very shortly after the revolution in Romania, when Ceausescu was booted out, I happened to find myself in Romania, and I like you, got totally fascinated by the stories of the kids living in sewers and things like this and places like this. And I'd never done anything like that, and I was terrified. And I had a translator who said, "Okay, just buy them something." They've said, "Yes, you can take their picture." And like you, I disagree with this take a picture approach. But do you know what? We bought them some bread and some ham. And there was about 20 of them. This lady came up out of the ground carrying a filthy, dirty, old plastic tablecloth. She put it on the grass next to 6 lanes of traffic. And they put this food on this cloth. And then one guy with a white eye stood up and he said grace over it. And in that moment, they were kind of transformed from cutthroats and robbers who were probably going to beat me up and steal my cameras into just these most beautiful, wonderful, fabulous people who had, been dealt a shit hand. And you're so right about spending time and investing. And I don't know what your thoughts on this one are, but I mean, the great tradition of storytelling, of, human beings used to sit around the campfire and they say, Giles, tell me that wonderful story again about the time you stole your grandmother's cakes, or whatever it may be. And that's gone. It exists in some more Aboriginal society, in some societies and within the Aboriginal world, if you like, I think, of storytelling. And storytelling has devolved into sensational newsism. And I don't know, how do you think that can be revived? Because I think, like you, think it's so important.
No, but I don't think, I think, stories have a mojo and a magic for me. And, I love storytelling, and it links back to, humankind's most primeval instinct, which is to share experience. That's what, to me, a story is. It's sharing experience. And so, cave paintings, the printing press, the TV, radio, all these things, push forward because of storytelling. And photography is a great storyteller. I think when you're talking about the photojournalism industry, I think that has become much more about sensationalism. I think people's core instinct is still a love of stories. So, I would say things like, Instagram and a lot of other social media things are actually storytelling. It's about people wanting to share their stories. And when I travel, most countries I go to, when I say I'm a photographer, they kind of look at me going, so what? Oh yeah, we met another photographer once upon a time who came and took our picture. It means nothing. So I will always say I'm a storyteller. I'll sit down and go, I'm a storyteller from the UK, and I'll tell stories, and then they'll tell me stories, and we share stories first. And then I just say, look, my camera is another way of me capturing those stories and sharing them with other people. Do you mind us doing it that way? But I will always say I'm a storyteller. And like I say, you can see that because people just, their face lights up because it's like, oh, here's somebody with new stories. It's like, the traveling storyteller that went through medieval Britain, taking a story from one village to another village. And also what's interesting is in a lot of communities and cultures, storytelling, and actually it's the same here, was always based on telling the same story again and again. So, fables that we grew up with as kids and things would be told again and again and again for generations. And so when I sit with a bunch of women in DR Congo and we're laughing and we're having some homemade alcohol and we're sharing stories, one of them will start telling a story and all the other women will get up and act it out because they know that story. It's familiar in the same way that we do with music. So we listen to the same music because we love it and we repeat it and we repeat it. And what I would say is in photography and TV, we've kind of lost that. And so again, we're always after the new, whereupon I will still show photographs that I took 10 years ago because it's still an important story. So I kind of, again, trying to use my photography in the same way that storytelling is, where actually repetitive storytelling is actually very important.
It is. And also, of course, the story continues beyond the moment that the photograph records, because like you, I like to go back, and 3 years after doing photographs in Romania, I actually did go back, and I was utterly blown away when these people remembered who I was. And I'm convinced, like you, we broke bread together and I spent an enchanted afternoon with them. But that story evolves beyond the time in which it's taken. It's those people have moved. For some, things had changed. Some had had babies and children. Some had got married. One child had been abandoned to an institution. And you think of these women, like what heartless woman would abandon her child on the step of an institution? It was a woman who feared for her little girl because there were paedophiles around, and she felt the only way she could protect her daughter was to abandon her to an institution. What a situation to be in. And these stories evolve and continue.
But I think that's, again, really important. I'm there. The first book of photography I did was called 1 Second of Light. And the reason it was called 1 Second of Light, it covered the first 10 years of my work doing covering the effects of conflict. And I was putting the edit together. And, there was all the best work I've done in 10 years laid out in front of me. And I'm looking at these photographs, and I realized most of them were shot at 80th, 60th of a second. And as I lay there with them all in front of me, and I went, shit, it's like all my work equates only to a second of time. All 10 years of my work that I was putting together in this book was just a second. And the relevance of that is not that it was about my work, but that I had been trying to tell these stories. I had told altogether in this whole book 1 second of other people's lives. That's all I'd done. And that's the point, is that I'd only shown you a fraction of a second of their life. And that's why I always say to people, when you come back, don't say you finished the story or you finished the project. No, you have just captured one moment of it. For those people, that story carries on. The project doesn't end, life goes on. So absolutely, it's we have to step away from this ego in photography. You know, it literally is reflected light. You know, we're just a fancy mirror. That's all we are. You know, it's like I see somebody, their light is reflected onto my camera and it's reflected back at the person viewing it. And all we are is a mirror. And we have to step away from that ego and remember that's who we are. And all we're doing is showing a fraction of a second of somebody else's life to somebody else in the hope that we create a connection, a moment of empathy, and hope that something positive comes from that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, Giles, have you got any pictures you'd like to share with us, have a little talk through? Because I'm sure people would love to see maybe something.
Well, we were trying this earlier. It was sort of half.
We were trying it earlier, and as usual, people who come here often will know that Browne is shit with tech, and we did have some issues.
Let's see what we've got.
I
mean,
let's see what
you know, I don't want to necessarily say go through a whole kind of
no, I know you. Everybody, I just want to say to folks that Giles specifically said he didn't really want to go through the whole lecture routine.
No, and I mean, you know, I'm always happy to do talks, and I do them in schools and places like that. But this is nice to have a sort of fireside chat. But we can flick through because a lot of these we've touched on. So this was the days of rock and roll photography. This is checking on the other screen to make sure we've got it.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's on its way. Yes, it is. Yeah. Everything's working.
There we go. And yeah, these were the kind of the images that I used to do. And as I say, it was an amazing experience. I mean, I think this first one, that was when I was 18 years old, with an amazing band called the Charlatans, and I ended up completely lost on a tour bus with them for the next 2 weeks. And I remember my editor, apart from this was the official shoot, and then the next 2 weeks was on the road. And I remember my editor looking through these 2 weeks of photograph and saying, "There's one picture of focus, Giles, and that's of you." And then we're jump. This is Angola, and you know this is what I was talking about earlier, where I started to do the documentary work. And actually, this picture from Angola, I think, is really important to me. The reason this picture is important is because I always look at it as how I failed in it and how much I've changed and developed as a photographer. So this is really right at the beginning of my documenting the effects of conflict. And this was a group of women who were living in these ruined, basically, school buildings. They were all widows from the war. Their partners had been rebel soldiers. The government had taken over. There was a lot of attacks on these women. And so they'd gone into hiding in these buildings in the middle of nowhere. And a priest had told me about them and taken me there. And I got there and I wanted to be this serious photojournalist and serious photographer. And I, you know, looked at the work of people, McCullen, Salgado, and I thought that's how I had to be. Now, this photograph, I think it won some awards. It's definitely sold a lot of prints back in the day, and people loved it. I don't like this photograph because what had actually happened is when I first turned up, people would run away. The women would run away, and I've been going there for days and days and building up trust slowly. And in fact, what was happening when I took this picture is that the women would sneak up behind me, and one of them would pinch my ass and make all the others laugh. It became their game. And I took this photograph, and moments after I took this photograph, one of the women pinched me on the ass, and everyone was laughing. And I didn't take the photograph of them laughing. And the reason I didn't take the photograph of them laughing is because I thought my job was to show this very serious, important photography. And if I had these women laughing, it wouldn't reflect the seriousness of their situation. Now, I wouldn't take this photograph. My photograph would be of them laughing. because I
Because they
realized,
are still human beings, even in the most dreadful circumstances.
well, it's just, yeah, and the point is
Yeah,
to reflect what you see, not what you think people or what you're supposed to be doing. And it came out of a reverence. It came out of a sense of, wow, these people have suffered. I need to show, that reality. But as I say, it's a good picture for me to remind myself of how I've come along. I mean, again, we can just skip through some of these early photographs. Um, I know. I mean, you were mentioning the self-portrait that I did. These are photographs from when I was
that's
injured.
you when you were injured, when you were blown up.
Yeah, far less interesting. Uh, but the picture that you were referencing was the self-portrait, which I did 3 months after I was injured. Um, Again, just to put a little bit in context, 3 months after I was injured was the first time that I really came to terms with what had happened. I was no longer fighting to just stay alive. I was aware that I'd lost my legs, my arm, that I was told I would never walk again, never live independently. And most importantly for me at that time, I was disgusted by how I looked. I'd been taken to have a shower for the first time, as I say, after 3 months. It was the first time I saw myself in a mirror. And I remember just seeing this broken body, not recognizing it, and thinking that I was not strong enough to be able to cope with this new life. I didn't want this new life. And I remember when they put me to bed, I cried myself to sleep thinking, I wish I'd just died in Afghanistan. And I did not want to be the person that I'd seen in front of me in that mirror. And the next day I woke up and I was like, well, you know what? It is what it is. And I'm going to have to find a way to deal with it. And I've been using my camera for years to tell other people's story. And I was going to have to turn it on myself, no matter how painful and difficult that would be. So my friend Simon Vinyl, who was actually that picture editor from that first ever meeting, he came and broke me out of hospital. We went to his photographic studio and I did a self-portrait. And again, I don't actually use this photograph very much. People often want to publish it and I won't allow them because it was a moment in time. But it is important, I think, in again, reflecting the power of photography, not just in telling other people's, but in our own story. And I had been to the British Museum just before going to Afghanistan. And I remember seeing the Greek and Roman statues there that are broken. And you don't notice the bits that are missing in those broken statues. And that's how I wanted to photograph myself. And so this is the portrait I did. This was the self-portrait 3 months after getting blown up in Afghanistan. And it was incredibly upsetting and difficult for me, to put myself out there. I put myself literally on a pedestal where you could see my limbs, you could see what was missing, the scars, everything. And I was ashamed and uncomfortable about the way I looked. But I also felt inside, I knew that I was a better and stronger man. And I wanted to reflect that. And I also wanted to do this for every person living with a disability, everybody learning with disfigurement injury, to say, you know what, you can still be an attractive person. You can still be somebody that people look at and look up to, that we don't have to be defined by these injuries. And in this picture, what I was saying to anybody was, I actually don't care anymore what you think of when you look at me. What is important is what I think about myself when I look at it. And this was the moment that I reclaimed my life. I reclaimed my strength and my dignity. And again, that photograph has inspired me in the work that I do now, because I want people that I photograph to have the same feeling that I had when I did the self-portrait, which was that I took control of my story, was not ashamed of my injuries or the way I looked. But what was important was that I was reflected in the way I held myself in those eyes and the way that I confronted people looking at me. And what I love is that I sometimes go and visit people that I photographed years before who have gone through similar injuries, who have been living as refugees or whatever. And I find the photograph that I took of them up on the wall, and it'll be a photograph of them in their worst moment. And when I see that picture on the wall, that is the greatest praise I'll ever get, because it's them saying that even at my worst moment, you photographed me in a way that reflects who I am and that I'm proud of myself from that moment. And so that's what, photography is for me.
That is probably one of the most powerful statements I think I've ever heard about what photography means to somebody.
Yeah. And like I say, it's when I see those photographs up on somebody's wall, And I think, my God, that was their worst moment. And they're now living in a house. They've gone through their injuries and all the rest of it. And when I see that they've got my photograph up on their wall, it makes me so proud, because I know that I captured them in the same way that I was able to photograph myself.
Mm.
And that they look at back. I believe resilience is the outcome of suffering, that we become resilient because of our experiences. It's like an elasticity of our mind, and it gets stretched to its limit. And when we come back from that, we're able to confront things in a different way. And that's my
Absolutely.
relationship with the people I photograph, is that incredible resilience. So it's that incredible resilience. And that is what connects me to the people. And we can still have a moment of pride where you look back at yourself, you see how resilient you've become. And if you have that photograph that is that defining moment in your life, even if it was a really bad moment, you can be proud of that. And if I can photograph somebody who's lying in a hospital, who's in a refugee camp, who's just come to terms with their injury, and they thank me for that photograph, and they look back on it, and we have a relationship years later, then that means I've done my job in the same way that I did it for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. There is nothing that I can add to that. It's kind of, I'm sitting here a little bit speechless, Giles. I mean, I've heard you speak before, and I'm privileged to have shared quite a few laughs with you back in February. But okay, so let's just move into something else. So you were also you have, maybe people don't know, you have also been documenting the story of what some of the staff in the NHS around the COVID-19. And as always with your work, it's not about the tech, it's not about the gadgets, it's not about the horror, it's about the human connection that is going on in these wards and in these hospitals. I don't know if you want to say anything about that project. What brought you to it?
Yeah, I mean,
why you chose to do it?
Well, it chose me. When lockdown happened, I wasn't particularly thinking, as I'm not a photojournalist, I wasn't going to be going out and thinking I need to get into the hospitals to do these photographs. I was leaving that to the people that know what they're doing. But actually, some of the NHS staff that had saved my life got in contact. And, I built up a relationship. I'm very lucky in that so many of the people in my life that I've come across, whether it be the people I photographed, the people that saved my life, have become part of my life. And I'm very grateful for that, because we have these ongoing stories. And so a lot of the staff that saved my life have become friends. One of them was a trustee of my charity. We built these relationships. And so now, when I have an exhibition, I love looking up and I'll see all these different people from my life, some of the people I've documented, some of the people that saved my life. And so they know my work, and they got in contact and they said, look, this is the most important moment in the NHS's history in the UK. This is a huge moment. There's photojournalists and obits but we feel it needs to be documented. Would you come and do it? And I was a bit like, this is going to be confronting some demons, because basically I'd be going back to the intensive care wards where I nearly died. And that's a place of horror, for me. I can go back to Afghanistan, but I can't go back to a hospital. I spent 1 year in hospital and I've never been back since. And those places bring back a lot of trauma for me. But I also felt responsibility and felt that I was being asked to do something that maybe, again, nobody else would quite understand in the same way. So that's what I did. And I went back and spent time in St. Mary's and Hammersmith and Charing Cross hospitals. I remember the first day in intensive care, actually in a proper unit. Obviously, you've got all this PPE, you can hardly breathe. It was completely chaotic. And hearing the bleeps, hearing the noises of intensive care made me feel physically sick. I thought I was going to vomit up in all this PPE. And I don't know if you've seen it, but in the intensive care units, you've got like layers and layers. You can hardly breathe. And you can't even have a sip of water. You can't take a break. There's no way. But one of my dear friends, she was the chief of the ward. And I remember watching, everybody was unconscious, obviously, all the patients there. And I remember watching the nurses going and talking to the patients even when they're unconscious, and holding their hands when they talk to them. So if they're going to do something, they will hold their hands and they'll whisper to them, I'm going to be removing this, I'm going to do this. And I remember thinking to myself, nobody else would get it. But I did, because I remember that even when I was in and out of consciousness, I was so scared and thinking I was dying and I couldn't have my family there. I remember this physical contact of these nurses and doctors so that even when it seemed like you're unconscious, there was something that came through from that. And I thought, that's why I'm here as a photographer, because I, like, in the same way of being injured in conflict, in that intensive care ward, you know, I spent 46 days as a patient. And so those little nuances and those little details were something that you know, I could see that maybe nobody else would have quite picked up on. So it was tough. It was tough as well because ARDS, which unfortunately is what the lung condition many people have got with COVID-19 that proves fatal, is what I had. And that's what nearly killed me. So that suffocating in the fluids in your own lungs is my own experience. So, you know, to be around that was obviously disturbing, but that's, again, that comes that kind of responsibility with things that if you've gone through the same experience as someone and you're able to help them tell that story or for other people to hear it, then I feel like it's something I should do.
It kind of puts life into perspective. You know, when we look around at things, I find that in our society here in the UK, lovely, wonderful place, and I'm so grateful and delighted to be living here. But it's kind of like, it's very easy to lose track of the fact that we actually live in the lap of luxury in this society and where we are. And then there are these little hidden corners of NHS nurses in a COVID ward. And, you know, as you say, it didn't occur to me. They don't even, of course, you can't just stop and go and have a sip of water. You've got all this stuff. And, you know, and the pressure day after day after day. And then also, of course, to be confronted with things like, oh, it's all a conspiracy. It doesn't really happen. It's kind of so important, I think, to remember these things, particularly when we're having a meltdown. I was having a meltdown the other day over something which is really quite insignificant. And a friend of mine said, for Christ's sake, sort yourself out. And yeah, it is so important to tell these stories, these little things. I mean, where do those pictures go, Giles? So is that something you did for the NHS? Is that something you did for the staff? Is it something you did for you as a personal project?
No. So it's not like I never really do anything for myself, although I've started to do a few things for myself, but that was purely NHS staff. And they said, we need this documented. So it's for NHS Imperial. I said I wouldn't be paid for it. I refused to take an income for it. You know, for me, I was just returning a favor. So they offered to pay and all the rest of it. I was like, no, come on, you know, you guys saved my life. I wanted to do that. But it became bigger than that. And so now it's actually the London Museum has it in their collection. GQ magazine did a couple of things, but the main thing is it's a document, and I love the fact that now sits in a museum as the official kind of NHS document of what happened in that hospital, and that's why I was doing it. And that's again coming down to this thing of why do we make photographs? What do we do? Sometimes it's not because I want to be on the cover of the New York Times. Sometimes it's because I want to create a document. You know, I want to be able to create something that sits back in time and that people 30, 40, 50 years can look back on and say, okay, that's a statement of fact and that's a purpose. And that means that I'm not driven by that commercial sense of why am I taking this photograph? Am I going to be able to sell it? So I'm able to work I mean, I'm a Luddite, you know, I still shoot on an old film camera. I shoot in a very basic way. I have like one lens, you know, it's very simple, but it means that I really am able to create something that is a physical document.
Absolutely. You know, I don't know if is there anything, because, you know, of course, when people are starting out in the world of photography, when, you know, as hobbyists or wherever they want to go, certainly these days we're bombarded with so much stuff about cameras and gear and buy our thing and we've added a feature and you need it. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I remember Canon was interested. I had a couple of meetings with people at Canon about becoming an ambassador. And then it was like, we're going to have to shoot on our new digital cameras and all the rest of it. And I'm like, well, no, I've got a Canon camera, but I've had it 25 years. And it's an old film camera. And I, you know, they were like, well, why don't you use this new one? And I was like, well, this one still works. You know, and that for me has always been the way it works. I mean, if a camera works, why would I change it? And I'm happy. People are always, and it's not just me, you know, for every photographer, you know, and especially I think for women, there's always like people telling them how they should do it, why they should do it this way, why should they do that? And I'm like, you know what? Everyone just back off. It's like we work in the ways we want to work. You know, I get it all the time. My disability, people will say to me, oh, you know, maybe you should try this camera. You might find it easier. Have you ever heard me complain about the way, you know, the camera I'm using? And as I say, I have a lot of great friends who are female photographers and they get the same unsolicited advice from people. And it's this idea that equipment and all the rest of it is what makes you as a photographer. You know, for me, as I say, I have a Canon EOS film camera. I have a couple of lenses, one I use all the time because I can't even change lenses. It's a pain in the ass for me. So I just keep it basic. And I'm really happy with that. And I think we have to allow every photographer to find their own space, their own way of expressing themselves. Some love all the equipment and that works for them. Some don't. Some don't want to be held back from it. You know, I remember Don McCullum basically saying he found that the camera was this annoying box between him and the subject.
Yes.
And it was like in the way. And you know, a lot of photographers, but I don't like the fact that then sometimes, you know, young photographers will be sort of picked on because people say, oh, you don't have this bit of equipment, you don't use this, you don't do that. You know, and I say just like, you know, we have to back away from that. For me, I remember somebody, one of the editors at The Guardian asked me to teach their daughter photography. And I said, look, I can't do it because it'd be like a 5-minute lesson, 3-minute lesson. He's like, what do you mean? And he said, I said, well, look, I'm not a technical photographer. My photography lesson would be this long because I realized that for me, you know, photography, I think, and, you know, a phone can be a camera. Yeah, that's as good as anything else. We don't need to be anything better than that. So for me, photography is simply about you point a camera in the right direction and press a button. That's it. But it took me 35 years to work out which direction to point the camera. And that's about here and here. And that for me is you need to spend more time making people understand why they're taking photographs, what it means, the implications, the ethics behind it, and spend less time worrying about the technical side. Yet we're dominated 80, 90% of all conversations about technical and very few about the heart, the mind, the ethics of why we do things.
Absolutely. Photography is made in the heart and the head. It's a handful of controls, bit of practice, and then, you know, it also, of course, people get so terribly hung up on what is right and what is wrong, and should it be like this or should it be like that, and, you know, if I do the rule of thirds, will it work? And it's like, well, no, it's like, the camera is a way to bring out what's inside. There's only one person on the planet I believe we have to please with a camera, and that's ourselves. And if it expresses who we are as people, great. Someone else will hate it. I bet there's people who look at it and go, Giles Duley's photographs. Oh God, you know. Yeah, I know people do at mine. You know, so what?
No, and people always will be like that.
Of course. But you can't please all the people.
It's like this obsession with sharpness, with everything being absolutely focused, perfect color balances, and all the rest of it. You know, if I look at the pictures that have the biggest emotive impact on me, they won't be like that. You know, the pictures that I remember is not going to be some technical picture of something that somebody's done of you know, an amazing mountain range where they've used HDR and they, you know, made this incredible multi-layered image. I'll probably forget it. It's the image that somebody shows me that's slightly blurred, that's slightly off focus, of a picture that they've done or something when they've been on a road trip, and I look at that picture and that will stay in my mind because I feel something. And a photograph it's a treasure to me. You know, photography is everything. When I was brought back to the UK after being blown up in Afghanistan, 3 days after I was injured, they stabilized me, flew me back. They said to my family, he's probably not going to make it. The worst things is a few days after because your lungs start to fill with all the from the scarring and you know, he'll go into shock. And they wheeled me past, you know, from landing me on the plane, wheeled me straight into the theater. And my family was there, my sister and my brother. And my sister said, he's trying to say something. And the doctor said, no, he's so medicated, he won't be even conscious. And my sister's like, no, you don't know my brother. He's like, he's probably trying to say something. And they saw what they could see, I was mumbling underneath this mask. And so they took it out because they basically were thinking this is my last moments and the last time I'd see my family. And now I was unconscious. I don't remember any of this. And my sister leans over, and I'm sure she thought I'd say, I love you, I'm sorry. I don't know what. The only words that came out were, I am still a photographer. And that was the point, is like, you know, this one hand was mangled, my other hand's missing, my legs are missing. I probably wasn't going to survive. Photography for me was never a job. It was never a hobby. It was never something that I enjoyed buying the latest gear and reading magazines or anything. Photography was my voice. Photography was the same for me as speaking. And the idea that that was going to be taken away from me was impossible, because if you did that, I might as well be dead. And that's what it's always been. And that's why I feel like one of the luckiest people in the world. I feel like a lucky man, because I still have that ability to make photographs, to tell stories. And as much as I want to tell the stories of other people, I'm glad also that through that I have my own voice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we go in, I don't know if anyone did. I took the liberty of saying to some people in our group, if you want to prepare a couple of questions for Giles, then please do. We'll see if we can spend 10 minutes answering them. But just before we go there, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about something, another side of your personality, and something I know little about, and that is you are a consummate foodie. You know, and you do post the most beautiful food pictures on your Facebook from time to time and just make me feel hungry. Now, you've been gallivanting around the world doing something with food, haven't you? Are you up for saying anything about that and what you're up to?
It's just another opportunity to tell stories. One of the things that frustrates me is, you know, again, you see one aspect of people's lives through one of my images or a documentary for Channel 4 or something. And I always said, you never see the laughter, you never see the humor in those positions because it's often hard to show it. You know, you can't always just show somebody laughing and say these people have just gone through a horrific experience. People get confused. So what I wanted to do was to try and show you the process. So, for example, a good example of what inspired this was being in DR Congo, where I met a group of women that had suffered terrible sexual violence and other crimes. And some of the most horrific stories I've ever heard. We shared stories. And when I photographed them, I said, I want you to be photographed the way you want to be photographed. How do you want me to do it? And they were like, oh, photograph us like you used to photograph the fashion people, blah, blah, blah. We talked about it. We had a laugh. And they said, come back tomorrow. We'll get rid of all the men. We'll have a great day, just us. Only thing I had to bring was some batteries for the radio. And I went there the next day and we put the batteries in and we had such a fun day. They had this homemade alcohol that they made. We were drinking that. We were listening to the radio. It was an amazing experience, very powerful, very emotional, a lot of tears, sharing stories and these portraits that, you know, again, I'm very proud of those portraits. And I'm also proud of the fact that I managed to get them sent back to the women who again, have them. Now, the point is that those photographs tell you one aspect, that they're very strong, powerful women. But you didn't see the laughter. You didn't see us sharing food. You didn't see me cooking and them all laughing that, you know, they didn't believe a man could cook. You didn't see us like, you know, dancing. And I said, I want to make a show that shows this. And so that's what we've done. It's you know, we did 6 1-hour episodes in Ukraine, DR Congo, Scotland, Lebanon, showing, I guess, the process of how I work. And through that, I hope creating again that human connection. You know, too many photographers, too many filmmakers always want to show the differences between us. And if you look at my work, actually, it's about the subtleties of life. It's about little details, the nuances, the banality of life. It's a grandmother brushing granddaughter's hair, a mother, you know, feeding a baby, a couple holding hands. And this TV show, and it's called The One-Armed Chef, is about food, it's about relationships, and it's hopefully about reminding us all how once we sit at a meal together, we're all the same. It's quite funny as well.
It is so funny. All the silly squabbles that escalate into massacres, because they begin as a silly squabble. It's like 2 kids arguing in the playground. What is your take? I'm going off onto a bit of a tangent here, and I hope you don't mind, Giles, because I want to make sure if anyone wants to ask a question, they can. And I also am very aware of your time. It's getting close to my bedtime, too. I'll turn into a pumpkin. Currently, you know, everybody gets offended so easily, particularly at the moment. I don't know what your thoughts on that, because really, to my thoughts, is we're all human beings and we are all different. And the sooner we can just sort of accept the fact that, yes, we are all different from the Monty Python film, the happier this world would be. And I think your photography and others like you, similar to you, you know, brings about a little bit of this story. I think this is one of the most important things with photography. I think it's one of the most important things with the Exposure, you know, Photography Festival is because it is a celebration of storytelling through photography. It's not a bloody tech show. But I'm sorry, I've gone off on a tangent and half forgotten what I was going to talk to you about, mate. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Everybody is so tetchy and, oh, you don't like my thing. Yeah, well, so what?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's quite a broad subject and depends exactly what you're focusing on. But I think, you know, photography is going through a really healthy reinvention at the moment. You know, it's been dominated by a certain perspective. a certain view of the world. I know as a white man traveling the world that I was able to put my perspective on things. And that's dominated the world of photography. And I find it really, really exciting that that's being changed. For me, it's as simple as this. And I have some people, for example, my charity, we wouldn't use me as a photographer. We would have to use a local photographer. So in Rwanda, we would have a Rwandan photographer. And particularly if it's a women's project, it would be a woman, Rwandan, taking those pictures. Now, I've had people then get to me going like, "Oh, I've got this problem against men taking photographs." Or whatever. I said, "I don't. That's not the point. The point is very simple to me, that if you love photography, the greater the diversity behind the camera, then the wider the vision for all of us. And it's as simple as that. So as a CEO of a charity, that's what I'm trying to do. As a photographer, I'm also trying to do projects that mean other people, like I'm doing something with Ilford where we're using disposable cameras, and I've been working in Lebanon and Congo with that, where people are telling the stories through photographs. I'm really proud that in 2 of the episodes that we shot of this TV series, it ends not with my photographs, but with photographs taken by children and people telling their own stories in images. And so when people get tetchy, when people get funny about all these things going on, I just think, we have to look at it in a very, very simple way, that photography's had a very limited perspective. It's come from one angle. And that's not to say that angle is wrong. And I think that's where people don't understand.
Absolutely.
We are not saying that's wrong. We are simply saying, no, the perspective has to be bigger. And I love the fact that we're seeing increasingly, photographers coming from this amazing Angolan photographer I was looking at recently. Her work is just absolutely astounding and just blew me away, because she sees things culturally completely different to what I do. So although I've worked in that country a huge amount of the way, her perspective blows mine out of the water because it's completely different. I have a different perspective maybe because of my injuries, but we all have our own views and our own things. And we just have to get over this idea of getting tetchy about people saying, oh, being too sensitive. No, we're not being too sensitive. We're simply saying that photography, for it to be best and most advantageous and most joyful and a great experience for everybody, means we have to have that huge diversity behind the camera.
I completely agree. Giles, would you like to just say a little bit about Legacy of War? Because I think that's important, and this is one of the things that we're doing this test with our positive pictures, PosiPics photo competition, and it's going to be in support of Legacy of War. Please say a few words about Legacy of War.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the support for the Legacy of War Foundation. We set up as an organization 5 years ago, basically because I got frustrated that a lot of people I documented, I thought we could do more. And I just didn't like the idea of going back and finding people I photographed and finding that they were in the same situation. And yeah, we set up a charity, and actually it's grown. And I guess carrying on the same thing I'm talking about with in terms of the ethos of photography, that I also wanted to change the way that charities work. So again, our projects are always designed by the beneficiaries themselves. They are localized. They are run by the people who benefit from them. There's that ownership. So, for example, I guess the proudest I am of any project is Land for Women in Rwanda, where we buy land, we set up cooperative farms, and we give the land to the women. And we do that for a simple reason, that we change the power dynamic, and then the women choose to work with us, not the other way around. So, everything we do is trying to turn things on their head a little bit, and for me, create a more balanced way of supporting people to rebuild after life. I don't even like the word charity or beneficiary. We talk about part and development. And it's for me, when I was lying in hospital, there were 2 groups of people. One were the people that came and said, look, we'll make sure you're looked after. You don't have to do anything again in your life. And then the other group was like, right, how do we get you taking photographs, even if you're in a wheelchair and working? We'll find a way. And that was what saved my life, because of the people that looked at it and just said, look, it's a technical problem. It's a whatever, we'll find a way for you to work. And that's what I wanted to be able to do with other communities, is to say to community, look, you've gone through this really difficult time. There's nothing wrong with you. I believe in you. The community is powerful. But how do we, as an outsider, help you to get back to where you want to be? And you tell us. We're not going to tell you. And so that's what I've tried to do with this charity. And it's nice. The charity is bigger than me now. I'm very privileged to be the CEO of it, but I have an amazing team, and it's all female team, and most of the 90% of the people are from the countries where we work in. And yeah, it's something that again just shows that we can do things differently if we choose to. In the same way that I hope I've done that with photography, I found my own way, and that's what we're trying to do as an NGO.
Absolutely wonderful. There is said to everyone, there is a link in the description area below if you want to find out more about Legacy of War. The Posy Picks competition is going to be in support of Legacy of War, so please come and test that for us. There's a couple of questions here. If you got a minute, Giles?
Sure.
Thanks, my friend. Annette Vorm asked, are there stories in your home country equally important to the war photography that you think are also important to be told?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult one. A story that I wanted to do a lot more of is poverty and food insecurity. In one of the episodes of this TV show, we talk about food insecurity in Glasgow. It's shocking that the system is so screwed up that you have Glasgow or Scotland that produces some of the best food in the world that gets, 80% gets exported around the world as fine food. And yet we were interviewing people in Glasgow where teachers had children faint because they hadn't eaten for 3 days. And you just go, there's a system completely messed up. But the photographic part is very, very difficult these days because, in the past, maybe you could have photographed a family that was deprived and go through hardships. Now, if you do that, there's a chance that they're actually going to be excluded even further and bullied, and social media will pounce on them. So most NGOs won't facilitate, and rightly so, that kind of documentary photography, which is why I think we see so little of it in this country. So again, I'm trying to do, it got just sort of messed up by COVID, but I was just in residence up in Toxteth, Liverpool. And again, that's going to be about getting the cameras into the hands of the people to tell their own stories. So yes, there are tons of stories to do here. And also my charity is starting to do stuff here. So we're setting up in Hastings, where I live, a lovely community garden where we're taking over a multi-story car park and converting that into green space and setting that up as a community garden. So we're doing things here as well. And there's stories I want to tell, but I think I'm trying to find other ways to do it, which mean that the people will not be further excluded or suffer greater harm because of my ego that I think I want to take these powerful pictures.
Got it. Somebody asked, Glyn, I think it was Glyn, I'm sorry, I think it was you, asked, was there any circumstances you would consider going back to doing any rock photography?
Yeah, and funny enough, I've done little bits of it recently because I love, at its core, I love musicians. I love that passion for music. And there are musicians out there doing really amazing things. So I have friends in a band called the Young Fathers, and so I've been photographing them. I'm also doing stuff with Massive Attack where my visuals are in their live shows. And so, music's still a huge part of my life. I'm passionate about music and it's hugely emotive. And I think, yeah, but it's just what I'm not going to do is you can't ring me up and say, we're going to pay you $5,000 to go and photograph this band who I don't care about. But I will do it because it's something that I'm passionate about. And I'm lucky now that I'm in a position where I've maybe, contact a band or musicians and say, look, I really love what you're doing. Can we work on something together? But again, everything, my biggest word, I would say over the last few years, that's become hugely important to me is the word collaborate. And if somebody rings me up, like a NGO, if UN rings me up and says we want to work you, or we want to commission you, I said you can't, but we can collaborate on something. And likewise, I ring up a band and I say, look, I love your work. Can we collaborate? So that's the word I always use now is collaborate, and that goes on all forms.
That is a fantastic approach to something. I love that. Somebody else, Terry S, asked. Great question, which I was going to ask you anyway. When and where can we watch One Arm Chef?
It'll be later this year. I don't know exactly which networks at the moment. It's going through that process, but it's definitely going to be out probably September or maybe a bit later.
Fantastic. We'll look out for that. Couple of little comments have just popped up. Sue Owen asked, "What is an NGO?" It's a non-government organisation, Sue. It's a non-government run. Sorry, Giles, you speak.
No. But basically, it's like a charity, but it's a sort of non-governmental organisation.
Yeah. This one's really just between you and me, probably, Giles. But Neil Bailey has just popped up in the chat and said, "Hey, boys." Who else asked? Emma Francis asked, "Who's your biggest inspiration?"
I mean, that comes in loads of different levels. I mean, a guy called Gino Strada, who set up a charity called Emergency, he's a war surgeon. He's probably had the biggest impact just directly on my life and the founding of a charity. In terms of photography, I think I would say that Don McCullen encouraged me to pick up a camera, but Lee Miller taught me how to use it. Lee Miller's work really impacted me in a massive way. And in fact, the biggest influences on the way I work are women photographers, whether it be Dorothy Lang, Galataro, Lee Miller, because I found a sensibility that I related to more. And again, I don't want to sort of generalize, because we shouldn't generalize about one sex or the other, but I found a more humane way of approaching war conflict that was away from the glamour of it all in their work, and that really changed the way that I approach work.
Totally got it. Sorry, I'm not ignoring you, Giles, or anyone else. I have another laptop here, and I'm harvesting some questions. Let's just do just a couple more, because there's a great question popped in. Crystal Craig has just said her father was a war veteran and double amputee. In the military support groups, vulnerability was often discussed. How do you manage personal safety and risk when you are on assignment?
I mean, the nature of its job obviously comes with that, and you just have to be as professional. You have to do as many assessments as you can, speak to teams on the ground, try and understand the situation. But, I don't really like to talk too much about that side of things, because firstly, I don't like sharing kind of war stories about the dangers, because weirdly, I think it glamorizes it. And secondly, there's so many jobs that involve some kind of danger, some kind of risk, and we have to assess them and do what we can. I'm not a risk taker. I don't like risk. I won't even go on a roller coaster. I'm that's not how I work. And there is a sort of idea that people work in conflict zones, they get off on the adrenaline and all the rest of it. I'm complete opposite. And all my colleagues that I know are exactly the same. And so it's like any job where there's a certain element of risk, you just have to, do everything you can to mitigate those risks.
Absolutely. I think we'll just do one more question, and then I think we need to let Giles go and have his dinner. And I'm sure you guys want me to tell you the results of the Shadow Challenge. And I think we should definitely do the Giles Duley Challenge. Somebody put a thing in the chat a little while ago. I don't know if you even saw it flash past, Giles. They said it was when you were talking about you can't roll on the floor and go upside down. And no, or maybe it was it was you who suggested it yourself, wasn't it? Apologies.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're going to do that. I think we're going to have a Giles Duley Challenge at some point, where everyone has to pretend to be Giles Duley. And
what I would say, it's not even about pretending to be me, but what I would say is actually it's a very good exercise.
It is, because it makes you look at the world differently. You have to see.
I do it with well, it's not about looking at the world differently either. What it is actually trying to focus on a couple of things rather than be so caught up in trying to find camera angles and shots like that, and actually focus on the photograph that you're looking at, and that's all your focus is on, and not on all the other stuff. So it's not about trying to be me, it's not about limiting what you're doing, it's simply about, if you cut down a few of the things that you're thinking about and focus on something else, then you might find there's another quality to your photography that comes through.
I think you're absolutely right. I definitely think at some point we will do that. I think it'll be fun. Would you be interested in judging any of the pictures?
I'm sure.
And also, I appreciate, Giles, your time is your stretch, so but I will give you a shout at some point. Okay, sorry, this is the last one, and then we're going. During a TED talk, you mentioned a young surgeon who was inspired by a photograph you took in Afghanistan. Did you ever find out which photo that was?
Yeah, no, I know the photograph, and I sent him a copy of it, and it was actually a really, it's not a photograph that, it's a really horrific story of a young boy who was out with his best friend, and his best friend stepped on a landmine in front of him. His friend was obliterated, and actually part of that person's body then smashed him and took out the bottom of his jaw, bottom of his face. It was a really, really horrible story, an incident. That was that photograph.
Giles, I want to just say on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for giving up your evening for us. And I think everybody here, just watching some of the comments, you have pushed a lot of buttons for a lot of people, and I think opened up some new points of view, which is a wonderful thing to do.
My pleasure.
Giles, you're a superstar and gentleman. I'll give you a call either later on or tomorrow or something, and just say thanks. We'll have a little chat. I owe you lunch. We were going to have lunch, so we're going to do it, all right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to see you, and thanks everyone for joining in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Giles. See you soon, my friend. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So, it's like being plugged into the mains, sitting with that man for a little while, isn't it? One astonishing guy. I think you will agree that when I said, that's a big deal. It's a big deal to hang out with Giles. It really is, because it's like, he's one of those people who has had experiences that when you listen to him for a little while, it's just like totally being plugged into the mains, and it just makes all our own kind of little niggly worry things kind of disappear, and just think, wow. Exactly, Glyn. How do you follow that? Well, I think we follow it by looking at your Shadow Challenge pictures, and I really hope you take a look at Everyday. I'll get it. Legacy of War, and consider supporting Giles and his foundation, as well as maybe joining in and helping myself and Tom test this PosiPix competition, because this is precisely why I am involved in it. Yes, of course, we want to make a living, but what could be a better way to make a living than if we could be running a competition that is pay to enter, but is helping people like Giles and others do the things that they do, to spread the stories that they do. If we can give a percentage of your sorry, I'm very tired. Your submission fee, your entry fee, not a percentage of profit, a percentage of your entry fee. We want to test this. This is all part of what I'm asking you to do, to test it. Does it work? Do the numbers work? Does the system work? Will it break? How does it work? There's a £700 first prize, and there's 3 runners up of £100. We will be doing this thing here. So, I hope you can support us there. And as I say, on the PosiPix front, the challenge will be posted on the Facebook group and email and the website as and when we are ready to go live with it. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it will be Monday or Tuesday next week. And my apologies, it wasn't ready for tonight. So let's go have a look at some pictures, shall we? Because I know you want to do that, and we are kind of over time as always. You are used to me doing things like that. So let me just see if I can make sure I've got everything working. Yes, I just want to share a quick picture with you that I robbed from Giles' Instagram. I don't know if you're still watching, Giles, but I hope you don't mind. But I just thought this was just so funny. So this is obviously from One Armed Chef, and his travels and his storytelling around that. I just love it. It's waiter, there's a chef in my borscht, taken in Ukraine. I think it's a really amusing little thing. Right, let's go and have a look. Obviously, we're not going to be going way deep with feedback sessions, but I do hope you agree with me that listening to other people who have been places and done things that we don't know, I think is a stronger learning experience sometimes than just having a feedback session. I think there is space to learn from everyone on this planet, and when you listen to people who've done something different, something alternative, that are making a ripple and a wave in the world, I think there's a lot to be learnt from them. Thank you, Jane, and thank you all for being here, and please share the thing. Right, let's get stuck into these pictures. It would be absolutely splendid. So let's have a look. Crystal Craig, I'm just sending you the biggest hug in the world, and I want everyone else to do that. Please, 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 everyone, send Crystal Craig a huge hug, because you're just helping keep it all work. You are lovely. Right, challenge. Come on, let's do it. I'm still kind of in that buzzy, weird space that you get left in if you talk to Giles for too long. Right. So my runners up: Linda O'Neill, Shadows, Shadow Challenge, Shadowland. I think you did a great job here. In really using this, because okay, it's that whole kind of shadowy, it's almost like hackneyed, isn't it? But it is still funny. It's great fun, the shadowy private detective with the fag, with the cigarette. Sorry, for you Americans, that's a cigarette. And the hat. I love the way you backlit it. I like the shadowiness of it. I think it's a great fun image. And yeah, operating in the shadows, sneaking around at night. I mean, I totally got it straight away. I think it's a great shot. Thank you very, very much. I'm just going to move through these relatively quickly because I think we're all kind of a little bit buzzy. Thank you, Clive. That is just delightful. Thank you, sir. Thank you to everybody who supports this group and makes it rock. I want to make it rock more. Crystal Bartholomew. Totally different and much softer, more gentle interpretation of shadows, of Shadowland. You know, is that it's a beautifully executed picture, technically and in so many ways. I don't know if this is your daughter. I can't read it. It's much too small for me. Can I read it over here? Drifting off into the shadows. Yes. Where the horses run and play. Is this a staged one, or was she actually asleep? It's just really great fun. It'd be great fun to know. But it's a beautifully executed picture, and I love those light rays, those just catching those little dust motes in the air. It's a different Shadowland, isn't it? A much softer, more gentle, snoozy, comfy and sleepy one. Bizarrely, this one here from Judith Stewart. I found this actually to be, because, you know, there were some great ideas, everyone. Please, please, please. You really had some great ideas and you rocked it. But this one I actually found to be the most sinister. And I know there are a few, you know, sinister-based sort of things, but there's something so sinister about that shadow on the left. I think it's an amazing picture, Judith. And I just think, I love the composition. I love the way it's just sort of put together. I don't know if you said what that shadow is from an adjacent building. Yeah, it was totally eye-catching. I mean, you know, we're going into the realm of, obviously, shadows. Because, you know, it's not just about the shadow, is it? It's about the connotation of a shadow. And part of the connotation of a shadow is that it's a little bit moody, a little bit scary, a little bit dark. And there's something so threatening. It's like a giant Christmas tree coming to attack a building. But it's a very powerful picture. Congratulations. Totally different one here, Annette's. I kind of like this technique. Funny enough, I was talking to Emmeline because she's not a huge fan of this sort of technique, of this type of picture. I kind of like them. I first saw one many years ago by a gentleman called Nick Jeffrey, and I don't know if you're here, Nick. Nick bought my first ever sale of an online course was to Nick Jeffrey, and I just love this technique of showing something in shadow form. So it's kind of like at first glance, what's that circle with a red bit in the bottom? And then the shadow actually tells you the story. It's not a hard thing to do. Thank you so much. That is absolutely wonderful, Twig. It is not a hard thing to do, but it is a very effective thing when got right. And I know you're here. I'm just intrigued. Is this natural light through a door, through a window, or did you use an artificial light? It looks natural to me. I'm not sure, but I'm intrigued. I would love to know. But I think it's a very creative idea. I'm going to give you guys that are making donations and helping to support PLD a mass shout out at the end. I'm not ignoring you, please don't think I am. I just need to go through these. Annette, if you're here, just pop it in the comments. I'll keep an eye out for it, but I am going to move on because time is shifting. Emma Rawls, I thought this was such a great, fun, shadowy thing. And, you know, in some ways it's kind of like, to me, it kind of touches on some of the things that Giles was talking about humanity. And kids do this so well. Kids just get on with it. They don't really think about it. They're just authentic and blunt. And I just think this is great fun. I think it's a really intriguing picture. I think it's caught a different capture of shadow, you know, being under that blanket tent in the kitchen with your torch at night with your brother or your sister. I really like it. And so our shadow winner is, to me, is one that I liked a lot, and obviously it follows my kind of style a bit, but you know, that's one of those things, isn't it? And that's why I would love to get some guest judges on board. Jos, I think this really is a great shadow picture. Shadowland. Technically, it is beautifully well executed. It is fun. It is, sorry, fun. Sorry, it's because I was reading comments while speaking. I shouldn't do that. It is so well executed. I don't know how long you waited here, Jos. Well, this person waiting maybe for someone to come out. I'm guessing Jos saw possibility here and then waited for something to happen within it. Often when you do this sort of thing, Esdras calls it a stakeout, then it's a question of holding a composition and then waiting for something to happen in it. I love the way the guy's head is down. That has a connotation of shadow, doesn't it? He kind of looks a little bit like there's either the weight of the world on his shoulders, or he's actually looking at his shoes and thinking, hey, they're cool. Not sure. Again, you can just see that he's wearing a mask. That says a little bit about what's going on in the world at the moment. And of course, you've got that really strong shadow of him. There is a wonderful decisive moment here in capturing the footsteps, the way he is standing. Jos, you're here, fabulous. Waited for 15 minutes. That is awesome. Which is, of course, again, listen to what Giles had said about taking pictures of people. You don't take pictures. You actually, to use his words further, collaborate with people in photographs. Okay, in this case, we're doing a stakeout. We're kind of taking a picture, but when you're doing something, you're documenting and telling a story. There's time to be invested, just like Jos did here, in waiting for something to happen. Yeah, I think it's a great shot. It's a great photograph. Thank you all so much for joining in, for being, part of this community, and for supporting it so generously. It really is. PLD is a non-profit organisation at the moment, and you guys who make donations, you made some very generous ones. Thank you so much. That is greatly appreciated. My plan for the future, a personal thing for me, is, I want to be doing more storytelling. One of the things that I love about photography is telling stories with it. We all move and evolve as we go through life into different directions. There was, of course, a time when I first took it up and I was learning, and it would be that, I'm going to get up early in the morning, I'm going to go down to the beach and see what sort of a picture I can get. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. But of course, over time, we need to stretch and grow and evolve. And I'm more interested in storytelling with my own photography these days, and I would like to do more of it. I might put a little post just within the group and just ask a couple of questions of some of you, because I've got a germ of an idea. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being awesome once again. I'm sure you'll join me in thanking Giles for inspiring and motivating us, and giving us an insight into the fact, the world's not such a gloomy place. So, be well. Take care. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for listening. Please remember there isn't a challenge email going out immediately, because the challenge is different. It's going to work differently. There will be an email coming to you. I will speak to you again soon. Be well. Love you lots. Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Annette.